Why was the hangar so quiet? Not even the roar of an F-22's engines could command silence like this. Mechanics froze mid-turn, cadets stood stiff, and every wandering conversation had died the moment Admiral Harris raised his voice. And she stood there. Captain Elise Ward, helmet under her arm, shoulders square, eyes unblinking. No fear, no apology, just silence. You disobeyed a direct order. Admiral Harris's voice cut like steel against steel. The echo bounced off metal beams, rolling across the cavernous hangar until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every soul present had heard rumors about her. Some whispered them with awe, others with contempt. They called her reckless. They called her a shadow pilot. They said she broke rules, that she crossed lines, but they never said she flinched. And she didn't now. "Yes, sir," she answered evenly. Harris's jaw flexed, anger in his tone but not in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or something deeper he wouldn't admit. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Elise didn't hesitate. "It means I put lives above protocol." A ripple of shock broke across the hangar. Mechanics shifted. Cadets blinked. Nobody spoke to Admiral Harris like that. Not like that. He stepped closer, towering, a man who had built a career on the unshakable spine of command. "This is not your decision to make, Captain. The chain of command exists for a reason. You are not above it." Her jaw tightened, but her gaze never faltered. And what if the chain of command is too slow? What if waiting for clearance means body bags instead of survivors? Harris's nostrils flared. For a moment it seemed like he might explode. Instead, his voice rang across the hangar. "This pilot is relieved of duty. Effective immediately. Remove her clearance and escort her off this base." Gasped a heavy silence. Elise didn't protest, didn't plead. She only snapped a salute, sharp as thunder, and turned on her heel. Boots struck the floor like drumbeats of finality. And still she didn't look back. But they looked at her, every last one of them. "Did you hear? She flew over Kandahar. They say she went rogue, saved a whole platoon. No, she endangered everyone. Shadow pilot, that's what they called her." The whispers buzzed around her like flies. Elise ignored them. She always had. Because the truth was buried too deep in classified files and in the minds of men who rarely spoke about what they had seen. At the hangar doors, sunlight sliced through, a brilliant white that made her silhouette seem untouchable. She stopped, just for a second, helmet pressed against her ribs. One last look at the jets lined in rows, machines she had commanded like they were pieces of her own body. And then she walked. The Admiral watched her go, his jaw rigid, but in the shadow of his stern face something flickered, doubt. Outside, heat shimmered across the tarmac. Her figure wavered like a mirage, but her steps were steady. Every stride carried the weight of choices made thousands of feet in the air, choices where hesitation meant death. She had learned to live with those choices. Command hadn't. At the gate, a young airman stood stiff, ID scanner trembling in his hands. Elise caught the shake, offered a faint smile, more sadness than warmth. "Ma'am, I don't understand." She clipped her badge back to her uniform. "Why would they?" Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the desert wind. "Sometimes the truth doesn't fit the report." The words puzzled him. He handed her ID back without pressing further. She turned toward the parking lot. Behind her, whispers thickened. Inside the hangar, Harris strode away, boots hammering against steel floors. Yet his mind kept circling back, her eyes steady, unyielding. No arrogance, no fear, just conviction. Conviction unsettled him, because it meant she wasn't reckless. She wasn't broken. She was something else entirely. At her car, Elise set the helmet on the hood, leaned against the door, and finally breathed. The humiliation stung, but it wasn't new. She'd carried worse. What weighed heavier was silence. Silence about the night skis. Silence about tracer fire. Silence about soldiers whose last hope had been her voice on the radio. She closed her eyes. She could hear it again, the roar of her F-22 vibrating through her bones, the black desert sky above, the screams of soldiers pinned in dirt below. The choice she made, the order she broke, and the lives that still breathed because of it. They could strip her of clearance, they could strip her of a uniform, but they couldn't strip her of that. The Admiral's voice still echoed in her ears. "You are relieved of duty." Maybe. But Elise Ward knew better. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The sun was dipping low, painting the horizon copper and crimson. She adjusted the helmet strap in her hand and walked toward the outer gate. Eyes followed, young airmen, mechanics, even seasoned officers. Some filled with pity, some with awe, most with confusion. At the gate, two SEALs leaned against a Humvee, silhouettes sharp against the fading light. They weren't in combat gear, but they carried themselves like coiled springs, men who lived ready for violence. The taller one squinted as Elise approached. His posture straightened, something in his eyes tightening as though he were chasing a memory. His partner followed, casual stance fading into attention. "Captain Ward," the gate sergeant said stiffly, "final sign-off." Elise unclipped her radio, pressed the button. Her voice rolled across the tarmac, calm, steady, unshaken. "Raptor Shadow signing off." The effect was instant. The taller SEAL snapped upright, hand rising in a crisp salute. Not protocol, not ceremony, respect. His partner followed, sharp, immediate, eyes locked on her with something between reverence and disbelief. The sergeant froze. "Wait, what did you just say?" Elise clipped the radio back to her belt. She didn't answer. She only returned the SEAL's salutes, precise, quiet. Inside, her heart thundered like afterburners igniting. Behind them, Admiral Harris stepped outside, meaning to watch her departure. He stopped cold. His eyes narrowed as two hardened SEALs, men who bowed to no one, stood locked in salute to a disgraced pilot. And then it spread. From the barracks, from the corners of the base, more SEALs emerged. One by one they halted, eyes fixed, recognition dawning, and salutes rose, synchronized, solemn, unwavering. It was surreal. An entire unit of elite warriors, saluting a woman who had just been thrown off base in disgrace. No orders, no words, just instinct. The Admiral's chest tightened. His throat went dry. What the hell is going on? Whispers raced like wildfire. "Did you hear what she called herself? Raptor Shadow, no way, that can't be her. That's the one from Helmand." The stories weren't myths. Harris's aide looked pale. "Sir, I think they know her call sign." Her call sign, Harris almost scoffed. But even as he said the words in his head, he knew better. Call signs weren't nicknames. They were history. They were legend. And whatever Elise Ward's was, it carried more than just weight. It carried memory. Elise kept walking, her boots steady on the hot asphalt. Each SEAL she passed held their salute until she was beyond them. To them, she wasn't disgraced. She wasn't dismissed. She wasn't broken. She was Raptor Shadow. The phantom in the sky. The one who had shielded them when no one else would. The taller SEAL broke silence, his voice rough but steady. "Ma'am, we never got the chance to thank you." Elise paused, back to them. Her voice softened for the first time that day. "No thanks necessary, just keep fighting." And she walked on. The sun caught the edge of her uniform, turning her into a silhouette against the gold horizon. Behind her, Admiral Harris stood frozen, every certainty crumbling. His men, his warriors, had just saluted the pilot he had condemned. His authority, his rules, his convictions felt suddenly fragile. Because respect cannot be ordered. It can only be earned. And Elise Ward had earned it 100 times over. How did a call sign carry so much weight? Admiral Harris couldn't shake it. Raptor Shadow, the words gnawed at him. It wasn't just a name, not in this world. A call sign was earned in the dark corners of combat where death breathed down a soldier's neck. Some call signs were jokes, others were scars. A rare few were etched into memory like fire. And this one had stopped his seals cold. That night in Helmand came back to them in fragments, not reports, not briefings, memories, and every man who lived it carried a piece of her story. The desert had been alive with chaos. Tracer rounds ripped across the sky, fiery streaks cutting through the ink-black canvas. In a dry riverbed below, a SEAL platoon crouched low. Dust filled their mouths. The air smelled of cordite and burned stone. Mortars fell too close, the dull thud shaking dirt loose from the walls that barely sheltered them. Lieutenant Mason, team leader, pressed his radio against his helmet, voice raw but controlled. "We're pinned, requesting immediate air support. Coordinates locked. Repeat, we are pinned." Static. The kind of silence that breaks men. Then, "This is Raptor Shadow." Calm, iron, a voice like a hand steadying them in the storm. "Hold your position. I've got eyes on you." Every man froze. Mason's head snapped up. The others traded quick glances. They'd heard the name whispered in fragments across deployments. A phantom pilot. Some swore she wasn't real. Others said she was reckless, a ghost that bent rules until they snapped. But nobody had ever expected to hear her voice crackle into their headsets. "Raptor Shadow were cut off. RPGs on the ridges if they close in." "Not on my watch." Her tone never shifted, calm against the chaos. "Mark your position with IR, keep your heads down." Above them, far above, Elise Ward rolled her F-22 into a steep dive. The desert spread wide beneath her, hostile signatures glowing across her HUD. At least 40 fighters pressing in. Outnumbered, outgunned. But odds had never stopped her. Her hands moved with precision, muscle memory guiding her as the jet screamed downward. The controls felt like an extension of her own body. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she was already breaking orders. Again. Back at base, command had denied her request to engage. Too risky. The SEALs were written off as lost, sacrifices to a mission log. But Elise couldn't accept that. Not when she could still hear the edge of panic in Mason's voice. Not when she knew she had the tools to change the outcome. She switched her comms to private for a beat, whispering to herself, "Disobeying orders again, Ward. Let's hope it's worth it." The jet's engines roared, cutting through the night. To the men below, she appeared out of nothing, a streak of steel and shadow across the moonlight sky. "Raptor Shadow inbound." Her voice filled Mason's headset. "Light them up for me." One of the SEALs popped an infrared flare, invisible to enemy eyes, bright as a beacon on Elise's HUD. She locked in. Thumb hovered over the trigger. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Then she pressed down. The F-22 spat fire. Precision-guided munitions tore into the ridges, detonating in surgical bursts. Explosions rattled the valley. Dust and smoke billowed skyward. "Move," Mason shouted, signaling his men forward as rocks and debris crashed around them. Elise strafed the hillside, forcing fighters into a retreat they hadn't expected. But war doesn't pause. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked upward, white smoke trailing, locked on her jet. Elise yanked the stick, rolling hard. The missile screamed past by inches, heat shimmer brushing the canopy. Sweat pricked her brow, but her voice over comms remained steady. "Still breathing, keep moving east. I'll clear you a path." The SEALs sprinted through the dust, boots pounding earth. Every ambush ahead was met by her fury from above. Her jet carved survival out of chaos, cutting down hostiles, scattering them like shadows in the dawn. Minutes stretched into an hour. When the horizon finally blushed with sunrise, the valley was silent. The ridges smoldered, and Mason's platoon, bloodied, battered but alive, stumbled into an extraction zone where helicopters waited. Mason pressed his radio, eyes on the jet banking overhead, wings catching the dawn light. "Raptor Shadow, we owe you our lives." Her reply crackled back, soft, resolute. "Just doing my job, stay alive, that's thanks enough." And then she was gone. A ghost in the sky. The story of that night spread faster than wildfire. At first it was a whisper between operators, then a legend. Every SEAL who had crossed her path remembered it, the sound of her jet screaming overhead, the calm steadiness of her voice when all hope was gone. When command wrote them off, she didn't. And that's why, years later, at a base gate under a copper sunset, hardened warriors saluted her without hesitation. Back in his office, Admiral Harris sifted through reports, redacted lines, mission logs blurred with black ink. He searched for the truth he wanted, that she was reckless, insubordinate, a liability, proof that his decision had been right. But the deeper he read, the worse it became. Operation Iron Dagger. SEAL platoon surrounded, extraction impossible. Ward engages against orders, clears hostiles, extracts survivors. Operation Silent Ridge. SEAL team cut off. Ward intercepts insurgents, precision strikes, Team exfil successful. Her name appeared again and again, tied to impossible odds, miraculous outcomes. This wasn't insubordination. This wasn't recklessness. This was a woman who chose lives over politics, courage over caution. And for that, the system had silenced her. Harris leaned back in his chair, temples pressed between his palms. Outside, the base hummed with its usual rhythm. Engines, boots, radios, business as usual. But for him, nothing was usual anymore. Because Elise Ward wasn't just a disgraced captain. She was Raptor Shadow. A name that lived in whispered gratitude. A name saluted without orders. And for the first time in years, Admiral Jonathan Harris felt something he thought himself immune to. Doubt. And doubt was dangerous. Why did the salute sting more than the dismissal? Admiral Harris lay awake that night, his office lamp burning long past midnight. Reports covered his desk, folders stamped with red ink, top secret. Eyes only. He turned page after page, hopping to find proof, something to confirm that Captain Elise Ward really was the reckless pilot he had condemned. But each report pulled him deeper into unease. Operation Silent Ridge. Mission compromised. Enemy force overwhelming. Team cut off. Ward intervenes against standing orders. Enemy neutralized. SEAL team extraction successful. Operation Iron Dagger. A platoon surrounded, written off as lost. Elise Ward engages. Survivors pulled out. Again and again. The pattern gnawed at him. She wasn't failing. She wasn't gambling with lives. She was saving them over and over again. And yet her record was a graveyard of reprimands. Medals recommended, then struck out. Commendations buried under layers of bureaucratic justification. Words like insubordination and reckless scribbled where courageous should have been. Harris clenched his fists. If the chain of command is too slow, what if waiting for clearance means body bags instead of survivors? Her words from the hangar replayed in his mind, gnawing at the rigid walls of protocol he had built his entire career upon. But it wasn't just her words. It was the image that haunted him. SEALs, his men, saluting her. Not ordered, not rehearsed, instinct. Respect could be demanded, he had always believed, but that was earned. The knock on his office door startled him. He snapped upright. Enter. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Mason stepped inside, flanked by his second in command. Harris recognized him instantly from the helmed reports, the platoon leader whose call for help had been answered by a voice in the dark. Admiral, Mason's voice carried the weight of men who had buried brothers. Controlled, steady. We heard you've been asking questions. Harris's eyes narrowed. About what? Mason didn't hesitate. About her, about Raptor's shadow. The name hit the air like a gunshot. Even now, spoken aloud, it seemed dangerous. Harris studied Mason carefully. You've heard the stories. Mason's jaw set. They're not stories, sir, they're memories. His second stepped closer, voice lower, rougher. Memories of being written off as dead. Memories of a voice on the radio that didn't give up. Memories of her jet cutting through the sky when the rest of the world had turned its back. The Admiral felt his throat tighten. She disobeyed direct orders. Mason didn't flinch. So did every man who ever survived when survival meant breaking rules. Sir, with respect, the only reason I'm standing here today is because she refused to listen to command. Silence pressed heavy in the room. For the first time in his career, Harris had no ready answer. No doctrine, no protocol, no tidy phrase about order and discipline. Mason's words cut deeper than any report. She's not just a pilot, Mason said quietly. She's the reason men like me are alive. You can call her insubordinate on paper. You can throw her off your base. But to us, she's the one we trust when no one else will come. Then they left. No salute, no dismissal, just truth laid bare. Harris remained still long after they were gone, hands gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles blanched white. Doubt had won. And doubt was the first crack in the armor of certainty. The next morning, the parade ground shimmered with heat. Rows of SEALs stood in formation, rigid as statues. Officers watched from the edges, whispers running like current through the crowd. And Elise Ward, no longer in uniform, no longer captain, no longer anything the system recognized, stood at the periphery. Her helmet hung loosely at her side, flight suit half unzipped as though she were already halfway gone. Harris had called the gathering under the guise of coordination between Air Force and Naval Special Warfare units. But every man present knew the truth. It wasn't about coordination. It was about her. Gentlemen, Harris began, his voice crisp, measured, though inside he carried the weight of sleepless nights. We are here to reinforce cooperation, to close gaps in communication between branches, recent events. A voice cut him off. Communication wasn't the issue, sir. Harris's head snapped toward the interruption. Lieutenant Mason stepped forward from formation, his jaw set, his tone steady but defiant. It wasn't orders that saved us in Helmand. It wasn't command that pulled us out of Silent Ridge. He turned, gesturing toward Elise. It was her, Raptor's shadow. A ripple moved through the SEAL ranks, not murmurs of disrespect, but recognition, agreement. Harris opened his mouth to reassert control, to remind them of protocol, to remind himself. But before he could speak, another SEAL stepped forward, then another, and another. One by one, they broke formation, not in chaos but in unity, and turned toward Elise. And as though pulled by an invisible thread, every single one of them lifted their hands. Salutes rose sharp, deliberate, unwavering. The parade ground fell silent. Dozens of warriors, men hardened by deserts, jungles, and mountains, held their salute for a woman the system had dismissed. Elise froze, helmet clutched against her side, caught between pride and pain. She hadn't asked for this. She had never wanted it. Her victories weren't medals. They were men breathing when they should have been buried. But this was something else. Reverence. Harris felt his chest constrict, his throat dry. He had spent his career demanding salutes. Now he watched men give one freely to her. Not Captain Ward. Raptor's shadow. Stand down, he ordered, his voice rougher than intended. The SEALs didn't move. Sir, Mason said quietly, with respect, you can order us all day long, but some salutes aren't given by order. They're earned. The words burned through Harris's chest. He wanted to shout, to reassert control, but he couldn't. Because he knew Mason was right. Every salute told a story. A night when her jet cut through fire. A mission when her voice was the difference between life and death. Every salute was survival carved into memory. Elise's voice finally cut through the silence. "That's enough." The SEALs didn't lower their hands. "I said enough." Her tone sharper this time, almost angry. "You don't owe me anything, not a salute, not a word. I did my job, that's it." But Mason's voice rose again, unflinching. "Ma'am, with respect, we owe you more than we can ever repay. You kept us alive when no one else would. You might not want this salute, but you've earned it. Whether the Admiral acknowledges it or not, we do." Harris's chest tightened, heat rising that wasn't anger. Something worse, something harder. Because in that moment, he understood. He had judged her by protocol. They judged her by survival. And survival carried more weight than any manual ever could. Slowly, reluctantly, as though it cost him more than any battle he had ever fought, Admiral Harris raised his hand. His salute was sharp, precise, deliberate. Every eye shifted to him. And for the first time in his career, Admiral Jonathan Harris wasn't saluting rank. He was saluting legend. He was saluting Raptor shadow. Why would the system erase its own heroes? Admiral Harris asked himself the question again and again as he sat hunched over the clutter of his desk. His office, usually immaculate, looked like a war zone of paper. Folders stamped top secret, reports littered with redactions, mission transcripts scattered like shrapnel. At first, he searched for ammunition, something to prove he had been right, something that confirmed his judgment of Elise Ward as reckless, insubordinate, unfit. But every line he read only pulled the ground further from beneath him. Operation Iron Dagger. Operation Silent Ridge. Operation Firebreak. Different teams, different nights, different corners of the world. But her name always surfaced, always tied to missions written off as unsalvageable, turned by her hands into impossible rescues. And each time the same pattern. Recommendations for medals, Medal of Honor, Distinguished Flying Cross, crossed out in red ink. Commendations buried under reprimands. Heroism rewritten as defiance. Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaustion carving lines deeper into his face. He had spent his life preaching that the chain of command was the backbone of the military. But here, in black and white, he saw something uglier. A system more afraid of precedent than of loss. The knock on his door was sharp, pulling him from thought. "Enter." Lieutenant Daniels stepped inside, clutching another file. Young, fresh-faced, still carried a nervous energy that war hadn't burned away. He hesitated at the doorway, eyes darting to the chaos of papers on the Admiral's desk. "Sir, I brought the transcripts you requested." "Set them down." Daniels placed the folder carefully as though afraid it might explode. He lingered. Finally, unable to contain himself, he asked, "With respect, sir, what are you looking for?" Harris's gaze stayed on the folder. "The truth." "About Captain Ward," Daniels said cautiously. The Admiral's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "About Raptor's shadow." The name alone made the lieutenant pale. He glanced at the door as though the walls themselves might be listening. His voice dropped to a whisper. "So it's true, she's the one." "You've heard the stories," Harris pressed. "Everyone has, sir," Daniels swallowed. "Not in manuals, not in records, but in the field, SEALs, Rangers, Marines, they all talk about her. Some say she's the reason certain units made it back alive at all. I always thought they were just legends." Harris leaned back, silence stretching. Legends, that was what he had dismissed them as too, until now. Daniels left, and Harris remained alone with the weight of a truth too heavy to carry. Doubt clung to him like smoke. Doubt about the system he had defended, about his own judgment, about the kind of soldier Elise Ward truly was. The next day, Harris convened a closed meeting in the Secure Intelligence Wing. The room was windowless, a bunker of secrets. Screens hummed softly, filing cabinets lined the walls, every surface humming with the weight of silence. Colonel Ramirez from Air Force Intelligence sat at the table, arms crossed. Commander Blake from Naval Operations leaned back in his chair, unreadable. And at the far end, Director Helen Price, sharp suit, sharper eyes, represented the Pentagon's Oversight Division. Elise wasn't invited, not yet. Harris began without pleasantries. I want full disclosure on Captain Ward, every sealed file, every redacted mission report. I don't care whose authorization it takes. Price's lips curved into a thin smile. Admiral, you know as well as I do some files are sealed for a reason. Digging into them will only open wounds better left closed. Wounds? Harris's voice hardened. I've got SEALs saluting a pilot who was nearly court-martialed. You call that a wound, I call it a scandal. Blake cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, the situation is complicated. Yes, Captain Ward saved lives, but she also disobeyed direct orders repeatedly. Higher command feared her example might encourage others to think for themselves, Harris snapped. To value lives over protocol. Silence, no one answered. Ramirez finally slid a folder across the table. Admiral, you asked for the truth, here it is. Harris opened it, his eyes scanned dense lines, and his chest tightened. Silent Ridge, initial recommendation, Medal of Honor. Redacted line, changed to official reprimand. Iron Dagger, recommendation, Distinguished Flying Cross. Redacted line, denied. Notes, actions undermine authority of commanding officers. His jaw clenched, they buried her commendations. Price's tone was calm, sharp as glass. They buried them because they had to. Imagine the precedent. A pilot who openly defies orders being decorated. It would erode the chain of command across every branch. Or, Harris countered, his voice low with fury, it would remind every branch what real leadership looks like. The room went silent. Price's eyes narrowed, calculating. Careful, Admiral, you tread close to insubordination yourself. Harris slammed the folder shut, the sound like a gunshot in the tight room. She's not a myth. She's the reason your SEALs are alive, and you turned her into a liability because her courage embarrassed your system. For the first time, Price faltered, just a flicker, but Harris saw it. And for the first time in years, he didn't care if the system called him reckless. Later that night, Harris summoned Elise. She entered his office cautiously, suspicion sharp in her eyes. Betrayals had taught her never to step into a room like this without expecting the ground to shift beneath her. You wanted to see me, Admiral, her voice flat, guarded. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit. She remained standing. Fine, he slid the folder toward her. This is yours, or at least it should have been. Elise frowned, hesitant, but opened it. Her eyes moved across the pages, her expression tightening. Commendations, awards, medals she had never known existed, each one crossed out, each one replaced with reprimands. Her voice, when it came, was low. I knew they didn't like me. I didn't realize they erased me. Harris leaned forward, voice rough with something that almost sounded like regret. They didn't erase you. They couldn't. Not from the men you saved. Not from the ones who saw you in the skis when everything else was falling apart. They tried, but legends don't stay buried. For the first time, her eyes softened, just a fraction. Why are you showing me this now? Because I was wrong, Harris admitted. The words tasted bitter. I threw you off my base without knowing the truth, and now that I do, I can't ignore it. The question is, what do we do with it? Elise closed the folder gently, as though it carried more weight than paper should. She set it back on his desk. We do nothing. The Admiral blinked. Nothing after all this. Her gaze was steady. Admiral, I didn't fly those missions for medals. I didn't disobey orders for commendations. I did it because men were going to die if I didn't. You think a piece of paper changes that? You think it changes what we all went through? He shook his head. It changes perception. It changes history. They turned you into a cautionary tale when you should have been an example." Her voice hardened. "History doesn't matter if the men lived. That's enough for me." Harris stood, packing, the weight pressing harder. "Maybe it's enough for you, but it's not enough for me. If they can bury you, they can bury anyone. And if the truth stays hidden, then the system wins. And we both know the system doesn't deserve to." Elise studied him, suspicion fighting against something else, something reluctant but real. Finally she exhaled. "You really mean that?" "I do." His voice was steady now. For the first time there was no admiral and no disgraced pilot, just two soldiers bound by the same truths. And in that moment, Harris knew. He couldn't erase what had been done. But maybe, just maybe, he could fight to set it right. What does it cost a man to admit he was wrong? For Admiral Jonathan Harris, it felt heavier than any war he'd ever fought. He had spent his life building a reputation on certainty, on control, on protocol that never bent. But now, staring at the sealed petition on his desk, he knew what this act meant. It was rebellion. And it was the only thing that felt right. The document bore his signature, a petition to reopen Elise Ward's record, to rescind every reprimand tied to her disobedience, to restore every commendation that had been buried under red tape and fear. It was more than paper. It was defiance written in ink. He knew the price: career suicide. Bureaucrats would bristle, the Pentagon would circle its wagons, and every ally he thought he had would vanish. But none of that mattered. Because when Harris thought of her walking across the tarmac, helmet under her arm, SEALs saluting in silent unity, he knew the truth had already broken free. And if the system refused to acknowledge it, then he would force its hand. The resistance came fast. Director Helen Price's voice on the secure line was venom dressed in civility. "You've overstepped, Admiral. These files were sealed for a reason. By reopening them, you undermine confidence in the chain of command." Harris's tone was steel. The chain of command buried a pilot who saved lives. Confidence was lost the moment they chose politics over truth. You tread dangerously close to insubordination. Maybe it's time someone did. The line went dead. Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaustion burning in his bones. He had crossed the line. There was no going back. And yet beneath the dread, there was relief. For the first time he felt free. The next morning the air over the base was crisp, the parade ground alive with the shuffle of boots. Rows of SEALs stood in formation. Officers ringed the edges. Pilots lingered in silence. The hum of anticipation ran thicker than engine fuel. Elise Ward stood at the front, helmet tucked loosely under her arm, her posture stiff but eyes wary. She had not asked to be here. She had not wanted ceremony. But word had spread, whispers of reinstatement, rumors of a reckoning, and the ground itself seemed to wait. Admiral Harris arrived with the sealed order in his hand. He walked briskly, every step betraying the conflict inside him. Part of him still recoiled from admitting weakness, from surrendering his pride. But pride was a poor shield against truth. He stopped in front of her, voice carrying steady across the crowd. "Captain Ward," he began, "by order of the Department of Defense, you are hereby reinstated to full duty, effective immediately." A hush fell. Harris's tone sharpened. "All previous reprimands related to battlefield decisions are rescinded. Your commendations are restored." He held the paper out, an offering. "This record belongs to you." Elise's eyes narrowed, scanning his face as though waiting for the catch. "You don't have to do this in front of them," she said quietly. "No," Harris replied, his voice firm. "I do. You earned this, and they need to see it. They need to understand what the system tried to erase and what cannot be erased." She took the paper slowly, eyes dropping to the official seals, the signatures, the words she had never expected to see. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Relief, anger, vindication, humility, all fought for space on her face. Behind her, the SEALs broke formation in unison. Salutes rose sharp, synchronized, perfectly disciplined. The sound of boots snapping against pavement echoed like thunder. This time it wasn't instinct, it wasn't impulse. It was ceremony. It was acknowledgement. Elise looked at them, her chest tight, the weight of their respect pressing heavier than any punishment had. For years she had carried silence as her burden. Now, silence carried something else: recognition. Harris stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Captain Ward, there are still commanders who will question you. There are still bureaucrats who will resist this. But know this: what you did, what you continue to do, cannot be undone. You are one of the finest pilots I have ever had the honor to command, and today the record reflects it." Her voice, when it came, was steady but soft. "I didn't fly for medals or recognition. I flew to keep my people alive. That hasn't changed." "And it never should," Harris said simply. The hum of engines suddenly rumbled across the sky. Heads turned upward. A formation of F-22s sliced into view, silver wings catching the sunlight. They arced high, banking in precision loops. Rolls and dives followed, sharp, clean, deliberate. Aerial choreography that spoke louder than any words. It wasn't a show of force, it was a tribute. A salute written in sky and vapor. The crowd below stood silent, every face tilted upward, watching as the squadron mirrored maneuvers Elise herself had once flown. Each roll echoed her defiance. Each loop, her courage. Each streak across the horizon, her legacy. When the jets thundered overhead in perfect formation, the SEALs saluted again. This time not just for her, but for what she had come to symbolize. Not rank, not orders, but survival, courage, truth. Elise stood still, the paper of her restored record trembling slightly in her hand. She had never wanted recognition, but in that moment, with sunlight catching the edges of her uniform, she allowed herself something she hadn't in years. A faint smile. Not of triumph, of release. The weight of silence had lifted. Later in the briefing room, Harris addressed senior officers and SEAL commanders. Elise sat at the table, her presence quiet but commanding. "Captain Ward's actions have already saved countless lives," Harris said firmly. "Her judgment, often questioned by protocol, has proven sound under fire. Going forward, I will not tolerate any attempts to dismiss or undermine her authority. In the field, her instincts are an asset. Period." A murmur swept the room. Some officers nodded reluctantly, others with visible respect, but none could argue. Elise listened in silence, her eyes sharp but distant. Recognition was dangerous. She had learned that the hard way. But here, for once, recognition felt different, genuine, rooted not in ceremony but in truth. Mason leaned toward her, his voice low. "Didn't think I'd see the day." Her lips twitched faintly. "Neither did I." And in that fleeting smile, the burden of years seemed to ease. When night fell, Harris lingered on the tarmac, the base quiet around him. He watched Elise at a distance, helmet under her arm, her silhouette framed against the runway lights. He thought of what Price had said: precedent, chain of command. He thought of what Mason had said: "She's the one we trust when no one else will come." And then he thought of her words: "History doesn't matter if the men lived. That's enough for me." The Admiral exhaled, a long breath of something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not guilt. Clarity. He had been wrong. But tonight he had set one thing right. And though the system would fight him, though politics would gnash their teeth, he knew one truth with certainty. The legend they had tried to bury had returned. And this time it would not be silenced. What does it feel like to return to the sky when the sky almost cost you everything? For Elise Ward, the runway stretched before her like a memory she had buried too deep. The F-22 loomed at the far end, silver and predatory, waiting. Engines quiet now, but alive with promise. For years, She had walked past these aircraft with nothing but silence pressing in her chest. For years, she had been told she didn't belong. And now, suddenly, impossibly, she was cleared to fly again. The weight of her helmet under her arm was heavier than she remembered, not from its shell but from what it represented. Flight wasn't freedom anymore. It was burden. It was responsibility. It was the past knocking at the door of the present. The SEALs were there. Mason, Daniels, and half the platoon. They stood at the edge of the tarmac, arms crossed, waiting. They hadn't been ordered. They weren't there for protocol. They came because they had to see it. The legend that had saved them was about to take off again. Admiral Harris stood farther back, hands clasped behind him, his jaw tight. He carried the still-fresh sting of defying the Pentagon, of making enemies among his own peers. But he didn't care. His eyes never left her. Elise paused at the base of the ladder. Her hand hovered, fingers brushing the cool metal rung. Her chest tightened. The ghosts came quickly. The ridge in Helmand, lit by tracer fire. The radio crackling with Mason's voice, panic cutting through static. The missile that screamed past her canopy, the near death that had left her trembling alone in the sky. And worse, the nights after, the silence, the reprimands, the knowledge that every mission she had bled for had been erased with the stroke of a pen. For a moment, her knees felt weak. What if the sky rejected her now? What if her hands weren't steady anymore? What if the weight of silence had finally won? She closed her eyes, whispering the mantra that had carried her through nights alone. You didn't fly for them. You flew for the ones who needed you. Her hand gripped the rung. She climbed. Inside the cockpit, the seat hugged her like an old friend and a stranger at once. Her hands found the switches by memory. The canopy closed, sealing her in, the outside world dimming to a muffled hush. Then came the sound. Engines spooling, turbines whining, a rising crescendo that vibrated in her chest. She felt it like a heartbeat, strong, relentless, alive. Control returned to her fingers, as though it had never left. Tower, this is Raptor Shadow, requesting clearance. The call sign hung in the air like thunder. The controller's reply crackled back, calm but reverent. Raptor Shadow cleared for takeoff. Welcome back. The words nearly broke her. Welcome back. She taxied down the runway, the nose dipping and swaying with each bump. Ahead, the lights stretched into infinity. The SEALs stood tall at the edge, hands raised in salute as the jet rolled past. Mason's eyes locked on her canopy, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Harris stood rigid, but his chest swelled with something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in himself, but in someone else. The engines roared, the jet trembled. And then release. The F-22 surged forward, pressing her into the seat. The world blurred, runway lights streaking past in a rush of brilliance. At 160 knots, she pulled gently back. Wheels lifted. Airborne. The jet climbed, a predator cutting into the sky. Elise felt her heart soar with it, her body weightless against gravity's pull. She exhaled slowly, the tightness in her chest easing. For the first time in years, the sky didn't feel hostile. It felt like home. She leveled at 20,000 feet, clouds drifting below like a sea of whispers. Her HUD glowed with green light, clean and perfect. She rolled the jet left, then right, reacquainting herself with the rhythm. Each maneuver sharper, crisper, as though the machine itself had waited for her return. Down below, the SEALs craned their necks. The jet carved arcs across the sky, loops and dives that mirrored the tribute flown by her squadron the week before. But this wasn't tribute. This was resurrection. Mason's voice was low, reverent. There she is. Daniels nodded slowly. Raptor Shadow. Harris remained silent, eyes fixed skyward. But inside, his chest thundered with unspoken words. I was wrong about you, and I will never forget it again. Elise's voice broke into the comms. Control, Raptor shadow commencing test maneuvers. She banked into a steep climb, engines screaming, vapor trails spiraling behind her. At 40,000 feet, she leveled, the world below nothing but a patchwork of earth and cloud. She flipped the jet into a roll, inverted flight for several seconds before righting herself again. Each move sharper than the last, muscle memory fused with instinct. Her hands were steady. Her heart was steady. And the ghosts fell away. For a moment she allowed herself to close her eyes. The sun bled orange across the horizon, painting the canopy in fire. She whispered, not into the comms, but into the silence of her cockpit. "This is where I belong." And she knew it was true. On the ground, the SEALs lingered long after the flight should have ended. They watched her carve arcs and dives until the sun sank low, painting the base in twilight. When she finally landed, the wheels kissing asphalt, they stood waiting. She taxied to a stop, canopy opening, engines winding down with a sigh. She climbed down slowly, helmet tucked under her arm once more. Sweat streaked her brow, but her eyes carried a light no reprimand could ever extinguish. The SEALs moved first. Mason stepped forward, boots heavy against the tarmac. He stopped before her, his hand rising into a sharp salute. This time he spoke. "Ma'am, welcome back." One by one, the others followed. Admiral Harris remained still, his throat tight. When he finally stepped forward, he didn't salute, not immediately. Instead, he extended his hand. Elise hesitated. Then she shook it. The gesture was simple, but in it lived something deeper than orders. Respect. Recognition. Redemption. Harris's voice was low, almost hoarse. "The sky is yours again. Don't let anyone take it from you." Her reply was quiet but firm. It never was theirs to take. The words cut him deeper than any rebuke ever had, and yet somehow they healed. That night the base was quiet. Stars scattered across the sky, and the runway lights glowed in long lines of pale blue. Elise walked alone along the tarmac, helmet swinging loosely at her side. Her steps slowed as she glanced upward. The sky stretched endless, vast, and waiting. For years it had been her battlefield, her salvation, and her exile. Now it was hers again. But she knew the fight wasn't over. The Pentagon would not forget. The bureaucrats would not forgive. The system would strike back. And yet, as the cool night air brushed against her skin, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. Not for medals, not for recognition, but for the freedom to fly. Not for them, not for orders, but for those who needed her. For the ones who still waited in the dust, the smoke, the shadows. Her call sign had survived the silence. And so had she. What happens when the truth refuses to stay buried? The Pentagon's response came swift, cold, and brutal. Within 48 hours of Elise Ward's reinstatement, Admiral Harris's inbox flooded with encrypted messages, directives, inquiries, thinly veiled threats disguised as formal concerns. Each one demanded explanation for his unauthorized reinstatement of a previously disciplined officer. Director Helen Price didn't bother with subtlety. She appeared on a secure video feed in his office, her expression cut from steel. "You've lit a fire, Admiral," she said flatly, "and you've put your entire career on the line. Do you understand that?" Harris didn't flinch. "I understand perfectly. I also understand that I was wrong. Captain Ward's record speaks for itself, no matter how many black lines you tried to smear it with." Price's lips thinned. "We buried those commendations for a reason. If soldiers think disobedience leads to medals, we'll have chaos. Ward is a liability." "No," his voice sharpened. "She's an asset, and the only chaos I see is the system that punishes courage and rewards compliance at the cost of lives." Her eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Admiral. If you keep pushing, you won't just lose your command. You'll lose your career, your pension, everything." Harris leaned forward. If losing everything is the cost of telling the truth, then so be it. The feed cut, leaving him alone with the echo of his words. For the first time in years, he felt the ground beneath his feet not as duty, but as conviction. Elise sensed it before he even told her. She found him on the tarmac, staring at the horizon as F-22s streaked across the evening sky. His shoulders carried the weight of decisions that could not be undone. "They're coming for you," she said simply. He turned slowly, his face tired but resolute. "They're coming for both of us." Her jaw tightened. "I told you I don't need the recognition. I didn't want this fight." "And yet it found you," Harris countered. His voice softened. "Elise, the truth has a way of doing that. It refuses to stay quiet." Her eyes burned with something deeper than anger, a familiar ache. Truth doesn't matter in their world. Men lived because I broke their rules. That's all that should count, but it doesn't. "Maybe not to them," Harris admitted, "but it does to the ones you saved. It does to me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The roar of jet engines filled the silence. Finally, Elise whispered, "If they take it all away again, if they erase me a second time, I won't survive it." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it, raw, vulnerable. Harris didn't move closer, didn't offer comfort she would reject. He only nodded. "Then we make sure they can't." The fight came in layers. Price ordered an inquiry into Harris's conduct. Panels convened in Washington, officers in crisp uniforms circling like vultures. Every mission Elise had flown was dissected, stripped of context, painted in the worst possible light. They called her reckless. They called her arrogant. They called her dangerous. But then the SEALs came. One by one, uninvited, they appeared before the inquiry. Not officers, not politicians, warriors. Mason stood tall, his voice steady. "Reckless. She's the reason my men came home. If that's recklessness, then I wish every pilot had her courage." Daniels followed. "Dangerous. Yes, to the enemy, to every man who tried to kill us, but to us, she was salvation." Others echoed the same. Voices that could not be silenced. Testimonies that cut sharper than any reprimand. The panel squirmed. Because no matter how many red lines they drew across Elise's file, no matter how many words they twisted, they could not erase the living proof of her defiance. Men who had survived because she refused to leave them behind. That night Elise sat alone in her quarters. The walls were bare, the bed untouched. Her helmet rested on the desk, its visor catching the faint light. She ran her fingers across the surface, tracing the scratches, the scars etched by years of combat. Each mark was a story, each crack a reminder. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, "Maybe they're right, maybe I am reckless." But another voice echoed back, Mason's, steady and unyielding. "You're the reason we're alive." Her throat tightened. The conflict tore inside her. She had never wanted the spotlight. She had never asked for medals. All she had ever wanted was to do her job, to keep men breathing when the system wrote them off. And yet now, the spotlight burned brighter than ever. She didn't know if she had the strength to stand in it. Harris found her the next morning. She was already in the hangar, standing by her jet, helmet under her arm. The look in her eyes was different. Not fear, not pride, something harder, something sharper. "I thought about walking away," she admitted. "Letting them win, letting them erase me again." His chest tightened, and she lifted her helmet, sliding it beneath her arm with deliberate weight. "And then I realized they don't get to decide who I am. They can bury commendations, they can strip rank, but they can't take the sky, not from me." Harris nodded slowly, pride settling heavy in his chest. "Then fly. Show them the truth they can't redact." The inquiry dragged on, but something shifted. Every time the Pentagon tried to smear her, another SEAL stood in her defense. Every time they questioned her judgment, another commander testified to her precision. Every time they tried to paint her as a danger, Harris countered with cold, unflinching truth. The legend of Raptor Shadow only grew stronger, not from stories whispered in the dark, but from voices raised in the light. And Elise, though she resisted it, though she hated it, became something she never wanted. A symbol, not of defiance alone, but of dignity, of survival, of the simple, stubborn refusal to abandon those who trusted her. One evening, as the hearings dragged into another week, Elise sat alone on the runway, watching the sun sink low. The horizon burned gold and crimson, the sky alive with color. Mason approached quietly, lowering himself onto the tarmac beside her. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally he spoke. "You know, ma'am, legends aren't made in panels or hearings. They're made in the dust, in the smoke, in the sky. You already wrote yours. They can't erase it no matter how hard they try." She swallowed hard, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "I didn't want to be a legend. I just wanted to do my job." Mason's voice softened. "That's why you became one." Her throat tightened, tears threatening but unshed. She turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the crack in her armor. But in her chest, something shifted. Hope. Fragile, faint, but alive. In Washington, Director Price paced her office, fury simmering beneath her composure. The inquiry had stalled. The testimonies had swayed too many. The legend had slipped from their grasp. She knew one truth. If Elise Ward continued flying, if Harris continued backing her, the system's control would fracture. And she would not allow that. Price's voice was a whisper when she made the call. "End this, one way or another." How do you kill a legend that refuses to die? Director Helen Price thought she knew the answer. You don't kill the person. You kill the reputation. You bury them under doubt until no one remembers who they were. But Elise Ward had survived too much to be forgotten. So Price took the darker path. She called it an operational test, a routine exercise, a simple drill meant to evaluate Elise's fitness to fly after reinstatement. But everyone who read the orders saw the trap. The parameters were reckless, the risks unnecessary. A live fire intercept against simulated hostiles on the edge of contested airspace. The message was clear. If Elise failed, she would be finished. If she succeeded, Price could still frame her as unstable, reckless, too volatile to trust. Admiral Harris saw through it immediately. He stormed into Price's office via secure feed, his voice sharp. "This isn't evaluation, it's entrapment." Price's eyes were cold. "It's procedure. If she can't handle it, she doesn't belong in the sky." "She belongs more than anyone." "Not to us," Price hissed. But Harris had no power to stop it. Orders had been signed. The test would proceed. The dawn of the exercise broke sharp and cold. Elise suited up in silence, helmet under her arm, the weight of inevitability pressing down on her chest. She knew exactly what this was. A setup. A knife in the dark disguised as a handshake. Mason and his men found her at the hangar. Their presence wasn't required, but they were there anyway. "You don't have to prove anything," Mason said quietly. Her lips twitched with the faintest trace of a smile. "That's where you're wrong. I do, not to them, to myself." She climbed into the cockpit, canopy closing with a hiss. Engines roared to life, vibrating through the tarmac. Her voice cut through the comms. Raptor Shadow ready for tasking. Even now, even here, the call sign carried weight. The controller hesitated before replying, as if acknowledging he was speaking to more than just a pilot. Raptor Shadow cleared for exercise. At 30,000 feet, the simulation unfolded. Hostile drones swarmed across her HUD, glowing red. Fast, numerous, designed to overwhelm. Her orders were simple: engage, neutralize, return. But she knew the truth. The parameters were impossible. No pilot was expected to succeed. That was the point. Her hands gripped the stick. She felt the familiar tremor of adrenaline, the whisper of doubt, the same ghosts that had haunted her after every mission. Reckless, dangerous, liability. And then she remembered Mason's voice. Legends aren't made in panels, they're made in the dust, in the sky. Her jaw set. "Let's dance," she muttered. The F-22 screamed into a dive. She fired bursts of cannon fire, precise and surgical, shredding drones into fireballs. She rolled, dodging counterfire, engines howling. Her HUD lit with warnings, missiles locked, alerts blaring. Her heart pounded, but her voice over comm stayed calm. Target 1 neutralized, Target 2 neutralized, continuing engagement. From the ground, Harris and the SEALs watched the feed in silence. On the monitor, Elise's jet carved the sky with impossible grace. Every maneuver defied the odds. Every strike was precise. Mason's fists clenched. She's not just passing this test, she's rewriting it. Price stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. But Harris saw it, the flicker of unease, the crack in her armor. Elise was supposed to fail. Instead, she was flying like the sky itself belonged to her. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sweat beaded on Elise's brow, her body pressed hard into the seat under G-forces. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, but her focus never wavered. One by one, the drones fell. Explosions lit the horizon, smoke trails carving across the heavens. Finally, silence. Her HUD cleared, no more targets. Her voice, breathless but steady, filled the comms. "Control, Raptor Shadow. Exercise complete. All targets neutralized." The tower didn't respond at first. The silence was heavy, stunned. Then, "Copy, Raptor Shadow. Exercise complete." On the ground, the SEALs erupted, fists raised, shouts of triumph breaking the still air. Mason's voice rose above them all. "That's my pilot." Harris didn't cheer. He simply stood taller, pride swelling in his chest. And Price, her face was stone, but her silence betrayed her. She had lost. Because Elise Ward had done what she always did. She had refused to die, refused to fail, refused to give them the ending they wanted. Hours later, the hangar was quiet again. Elise stepped down from her jet, helmet under her arm, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. She looked exhausted, but her eyes carried a fire that no one could extinguish. The SEALs were waiting, lined in formation. As she walked past, their salutes rose one by one, crisp and unwavering. This time she didn't stop them. This time she accepted it. Because she finally understood. This wasn't about medals or panels or records. It was about the men who lived. It was about the truth no file could erase. It was about dignity that spoke louder than orders. Admiral Harris stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. "Captain Ward, today, you didn't just prove them wrong. You reminded all of us what it means to lead, not with rank, not with rules, but with courage." Her reply was quiet, almost a whisper. "Sometimes courage is just refusing to walk away." He nodded, and sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. And then the SEALs saluted again. Not because they had to, not because they were ordered, but because legends don't need orders. Legends earn respect the only way that matters, by showing up when the world turns its back. And Elise Ward, Raptor Shadow, had shown up, again and again and again. That night, Elise stood alone at the edge of the runway, helmet tucked under her arm, the stars wide and endless above her. She thought of the battles behind her, the scars no file could capture, the lives she had saved, the silence she had carried. She whispered into the darkness, not for anyone else to hear. "I'm still here." The wind carried her words away. And somewhere far above, the sky seemed to answer.